And if this is your first time giving your mind a little love, I have a few goodies for you. First, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And second, sign up for the Morning Mind Love. Think of it like a weekday oracle from your highest self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, you'll get 2 gifts absolutely free: a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 309. Today's episode is all about liberating yourself from emotional walls using Buddhist psychology with Sharon Salzberg.
It's also interesting, and this is something we rarely do, because when there's a strong craving or desire, we tend to fixate on and be fascinated by the object, the story, the thing, the person, whatever it is. We rarely kind of pivot our attention around as though to ask ourselves, what does it feel like to want something so badly? And we start with the body. Like, what does it feel like in my body to have this kind of yearning, this wanting? And then it's like we break it down to its component parts. It's like, what's the movie that's going on? And people discover very interesting things. Like, people say things like, I didn't realize how much loneliness there was in the desire. I thought it was really about that thing or that person or that experience, but look at what was in the heart of it. Or I didn't realize there was so much sadness in that anger. And we learn so much from being able to look at the feeling itself.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. When was the last time that you really allowed yourself to feel? And I'm not talking about those top layer feelings that come and go, but those deep, messy ones that we usually dodge in our turbocharged, on-the-go lives. For the longest time, I was the queen of dodging those feelings. Anything that threatened to poke at my soft spots, well, I'd sidestep it faster than you can say, numb it out. And here's the kicker. The more I ran from those feelings, the more alone I felt. Ever feel like you're all by yourself in a room full of people? Yeah, that was me, all day, every day. Like I'd created my own personal island, and not the tropical kind. So don't feel bad if you're nodding along, because this isn't really a unique problem. So many of us have been there, feeling like a stranger in our own life, disconnected from something deeper, from any meaning. But what if I told you that this disconnect isn't a bad thing, but maybe a stepping stone to something better? Let me introduce you to Buddhist psychology. It takes a hard look at this feeling of disconnection and it chalks it up to our mad scramble for the good stuff, running away from the bad stuff, and numbing out all of those in-betweens. Sound familiar? Well, what if we could flip the script? I still remember when it all clicked for me. I was on about day 48 of a meditation challenge, and I was sitting smack dab in the middle of nature, and suddenly I just started unpacking years of emotional baggage. Bit by bit, breath by breath, I had this realization of what it really means to embrace my feelings, even the ones I'd been avoiding like a bad date. If you've ever had a revelation like this before, you know what I'm talking about. But nothing can change around you except for your perspective of absolutely everything. Suddenly, instead of seeing my somewhere between 10 to 28 years of numbing and disconnection as a mistake or a regret, I had this understanding. I realized I was pushing away parts of myself and missing out on the whole human experience. Buddhist psychology teaches us, in the seeing, there's only the seen. In the hearing, there's only the heard. What does that mean? Well, it's about directly experiencing life, without judgment, without resistance, without your mind running a marathon in the background. And that's a little of what we're talking about today. So our guest today is Sharon Salzberg. She's a meditation pioneer, a world-renowned teacher, and a New York Times bestselling author. I first heard of Sharon Salzberg in the Headspace app, where she has a whole featured section in there, or at least she did when I began meditating. Well, she's one of the first people to bring mindfulness and loving kindness meditation to mainstream American culture over 45 years ago, inspiring generations of meditation teachers and wellness influencers. She's also the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society and the author of 12 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Real Happiness. Her newest book is called Real Life: The Journey from Isolation to Openness and Freedom. I'd also like to give a little disclaimer that I'm pretty sick in the recording of this episode, so I apologize for my super extra raspy voice, but the show must go on. I used to be one of those people who had grand plans for a big healthy meal every Sunday night, and I'd make these elaborate meal plans, buy all the ingredients, and then Wednesday would roll around and I'd be staring at that wilted spinach, ordering takeout again. Shopping, planning, and cooking food really can be simple and stress-free, and that's why I love Hungry Root. Hungry Root takes stress out of mealtime by filling your cart with personalized picks and planning your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. With over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, many ready in just 15 minutes or less, it's so perfect for those nights when you have no energy left. What I love most is their smart cart technology. It actually learns what I like and what I will actually cook. So no more buying ingredients for recipes that I'll never make. Everything that shows up, I actually use. They screen out over 200 additives, including high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners, only high quality meat and seafood with no hormones or antibiotics, and they carry brands like Vital Farms and Ithaca hummus that I already trust. The time I've gotten back has been incredible. Instead of spending Sunday meal planning, I'm doing things that actually matter to me. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code mindlove. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code mindlove, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code mindlove. When you're growing a business, most people think the hardest part is getting clients or making money. But I think it's finding people who actually care about the work as much as you do. And I've been there. I've posted a job, got 100 applications, and maybe 3 of them actually read the job description. And it's kind of soul crushing when you're trying to build something that actually matters. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen by other job sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so that you can reach the people you want faster. And it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it just makes hiring so fast because you're reaching people who actually are looking for work, not just casually browsing. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. And guess how fast it is? In the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. And now let's welcome Sharon Salzberg to the show.
Thank you so much.
I have been a fan of yours for a long time, since I started meditating like 10 years ago. You were one of the featured teachers in the Headspace app. And when I first started this podcast back in 2017, I put you on my list of must-haves on the show. So I'm so grateful that it's finally happening.
Oh, I'm delighted.
So what inspired your latest book, Real Life?
It's a very interesting question. Well, I, like many people, was living in lockdown in the beginning of that whole pandemic era. And throughout it, actually, I came up to Barre, Massachusetts, where I have a house and a retreat center. And in the course of those early days, I actually watched a show on YouTube called Saturday Night Seder. Seder, of course, is a Jewish ritual of Passover. I'd grown up in that tradition. And more than it being tied to a religion, it was a time for family to get together, for a sense of community in the best possible interpretation of the meaning of the Seder, which is the journey of the Jews from being slaves in Egypt to freedom. It's not about geopolitics. It's not about any location. It's not about any one people. It's about that movement from feeling trapped, feeling defined by the circumstances you find yourself in, into freedom. And I watched that and I thought, that would be an interesting book. So I used that time. It was the first time I've ever written a book, and this is my 12th book. It's the first time I've ever written a book without also traveling and snatching an hour here or there. So I was just here, where I still am in Barre, Mass, and had the opportunity to practice meditation, to research, to really get into the theme. And so there's the book.
So you said you grew up with the Jewish tradition, but now you identify more as being a Buddhist. What has that transformation of kind of moving from a more, I guess, kind of, I look at it sort of as like a strict law-abiding tradition to more of one as of openness?
The legacy I had was I grew up for a while with my grandparents, and so that meant a kind of adherence to orthodoxy or observance within the Jewish tradition that wasn't necessarily common in my time, which was sort of a secular time by and large for a lot of people. And Buddhism is odd in that way. It's more a psychological system than anything. It's not really a belief system. My first meditation teacher was in January 1971 in India. His name was S.N. Goenka, and he said the first night of my first retreat, the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. The Buddha taught a way of life. This is open to anybody. It's just methods of awareness and waking up and paying attention differently. And anybody can avail themselves of it. You don't have to call yourself a Buddhist or reject anything else. And so, in fact, I don't know that I identify as a Buddhist even most of the time. People ask me, I say, I don't think in those terms. I'm just trying to be, a good person or trying to have a happier life. And that's been true all along. But the language I tend to use, the stories, the imagery, often come from the Buddhist psychology because it's been a long time since January of 1971.
I was raised Christian, and we were very heavily involved in the church. And I feel like most of my adult life has been seeking outside of that, trying to find what truth was in it, what new truths I can find, like different ways of interpreting things.
Yeah.
And there was a time that I was going back and forth between what I'd grown up with and other things. And then I feel like I kind of severed something and wouldn't look back at it at all. And now I'm going through a time where I'm actually sort of interested in the tradition that I was grown up in, but in viewing it through a different lens. And in that process, I've been spending a lot of time kind of praying or meditating on just being guided. Like what is the truth in this? What is not? What can I learn? Where should I go? Type thing. And it's funny because I have been listening to a podcast called The Vedic Worldview by Tom Knowles. And I wrote down this quote, and it reminded me of so many things that I've came across in your book. But he said that literalism is the foundation of fundamentalism, and fundamentalism is the certain destruction of any body of wisdom. And you had this whole section in your book about fundamentalism, and I had this sort of epiphany while I was reading your book about sort of how I grew up was sort of the contracted version of the truths, while what I'm viewing now, viewing the stories, just like you talk about, like the Exodus of Egypt and the figurative meanings of that, the story behind the story, not just people exiting this area, but like, what does that mean on a broader scale? And that's sort of the expansive view of it.
Yeah. And I think, like what I tried to do in the book was also look at, okay, if this is the journey we want to make in our lives, from being defined by, the circumstances we find ourselves in, the way other people see us, the stories they tell about us, either to us or about us, the ways we feel overcome. We don't know how to break a habit or even temper it in some way. And we just feel so stuck. And the journey from that place to openness and freedom. And part of that stuckness, which is also figures in the subtitle, is a sense of isolation. We just feel so cut off and alone, despite the truth, which is that we live in an interconnected universe. We're not so alone, but we feel that way. So I started looking at, okay, when do many of us tend to feel the most stuck, our world gets smallest, we feel the most limited, the most trapped. And, from the point of view of the Buddhist psychology, that would be grasping, like when we're clinging, aversion, like hatred or fear, and then delusion, which is just like being confused, being numb, being spaced out. And I tried to think of, okay, what are real kind of interesting and not so common interpretations of each of those states. And for grasping, I really explored like addictive tendencies. And for anger or hatred, I discovered something that was really interesting to me, which was sort of the role of shame in Western psychology and how, it's held out sometimes as a really positive thing, like having a conscience or being sensitive, which is very important. But it more is kind of a lacerating self-hatred. And does it actually help us, make a change and be better or whatever? And no, the answer is no. And so that was really interesting to me doing that research. And then for delusion, the kind of confusion, unsettledness, spaced outedness. Interestingly enough, there's a little twist of that, which manifests as fundamentalism, which doesn't come from certainty. It comes from doubt and fear. And, like the example is used of wandering around in the wilderness and seeking shelter anywhere. And you see some like little hut somewhere and you think, that's it. That's going to protect me. That's going to keep me safe. And you go for it and you will not give it up, even if it's like falling down around your ears, that's it. And so that was also really powerful and interesting for me to explore.
Yeah, I love how you called those the 3 root hindrances, because it really, those states really do cut us off from our core is how I view it. And I couldn't help but think I've spent so much of my life between the craving and grasping and the delusion. It was one or the other. And a lot of times I was numbing through the different addictive tendencies. And so I know that you said that you spent a lot of time in delusion as well. What does that look like? I know that you said that you spent a lot of time in delusion as well. What does that look like?
Well, I should also say that a lot of these tendencies, I think both East and West would agree, are often adaptations. It's things we turn to because we don't feel we have a choice, or maybe we don't have much of a choice at a time. Like there are certain experiences in life, especially if you're young, where, ceasing to feel is like a very smart choice. And getting cut off from your body or getting cut off from your emotions. Thing is, you don't want that to be your steady state. You don't want that to be your only option pretty well. You don't want that to be your go-to place when you do have choices and you're an adult now and, it's not a question of survival anymore. And you can be creative, there could be lots of opportunity for growth and change here, and so it's not to feel bad about it, or down on yourself for seeing these tendencies or having strong, kind of urges to go to those very familiar places, but understanding that it's a changing world and that we can work with these and it doesn't have to be that way. So delusion, for me, like sometimes in the Buddhist psychology, they'll say that you can have a kind of typology, like, you can have a personality structure that's largely around craving or largely around aversion or largely around delusion. And each of these has a very positive side too, by the way. So the delusion is that kind of not feeling thing. It's you're just kind of going along and you're not you're not very in tune with a lot of things, and that's comforting. It's like taking a little nap, even though you're at work or you're at school or you're commuting, not with eyes closed. And it's being in this world of just, it's cloudy, it's good, it's fine, it's fine. But the problem with it, which I also talk about in the book, is that you're then very dependent on the views of others to define what's true, what's happening, what's right. And that dependence in the end is not a very good thing. And so we need to develop a kind of acuity of attention and awareness on our own behalf, which involves beginning to recognize what we want and what we feel and where our boundaries are, which could be very new for a lot of people.
That was a big turning point in my life in general, was actually realizing that I rarely turned my attention inward. And if you would have asked me at that time, like, you wouldn't have been able to use those words and have it be the epiphany for me. It took me a long time to actually see, because I was thinking, well, I'm always in my head. I'm always overthinking things. Of course I'm inward. But I was overthinking what everyone else was thinking. Like I was making sure that I was fitting into what I thought everyone else wanted, what I thought was everyone else's version of success, what I thought was other people's version of cool or what looked good. And I was constantly trying to fit myself into that rather than turning inward and saying, like, what makes me uncomfortable? What makes me happy? Who am I?
Yeah, exactly.
And so actually being able to do that was like an aha moment that I never knew I needed, that unraveled over about 5 years of time.
Yeah. Well, my story that I often use in teaching about delusion was years ago. I was here in Barre, Mass, where I have a house and retreat center, the Insight Meditation Society, just through the woods, a little ways away. And I had gone one night to Cambridge, Mass, to give a talk, and I drove back and just parked the car outside because we didn't have a garage in those days. And the next morning I walked by that very spot and noticed that my car was gone. And I walked over through the forest to the retreat center to teach. And the first person I came upon in the staff dining room was, if anybody had taken the car, like to put gas in it or something, it would have been him. So I just kind of looked at him a little spaced out and I said, "You see my car?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Is it gone?" And I said, "Yeah, it's gone." Huh. And he said, "I didn't take your car." And then he looked at me and he said, this is the killer moment. He said, "Are you sure it's gone?" And I thought, am I sure it's gone? I walked right by that place. I'm sure I parked. There's nowhere else to park. Surely I would have noticed it. A car's a big thing, but is it gone or is it not gone? And that's the moment, right? Where we just give over everything to someone else. And I spent the morning like asking people, "Have you seen my car?" And somebody said to me, "Well, you just lent it to somebody and you forgot who." And then that rest of the morning I was thinking, who did I lend my car to that I can't remember? And then, I came down again after working, and then I was back in the staff dining room and I asked somebody and someone else overheard me and said, "Oh, I know what happened to your car. Somebody had an emergency and it was the only car I could think of. So I told them, just take it." And then he said, "I didn't think you'd notice." But that's, it's comforting for sure, like being wrapped in a little cloak or something, but it's dangerous to give over our vision of what's true to someone else.
Yeah, I think I spent 25 years doing that.
Yeah.
And it still is something that I have to bring a lot of awareness to not do accidentally sometimes, like especially when I'm around family, when there's something about my mom that kicks me into the childhood self more than anybody else. And so she'll be around and I'll be like all of a sudden just worried about what she thinks, worried about what she's going to ask for next. And I can get very in my head about making sure everyone else is okay to the detriment of myself. So we've talked about delusion. Can we go deeper into aversion? What does aversion encompass?
Aversion is the dual sense of both anger and fear, because in the Buddhist psychology, they're the same state. They're two different forms of the same state. Anger being the outflowing, expressive, energized form. fear being the frozen, held in, imploding form of trying to strike out against what's happening, trying to separate from it, trying to declare it to be untrue. And there is a certain, especially in the anger form, something really useful in that. Obviously, the energy, not to be passive, not to be complacent, to be willing to draw boundaries. Sometimes there's a kind of truthfulness in anger. Like I often say that, if you're in a meeting or something like that, you may be counting on the angry person to kind of pierce social niceties. Like everyone else is studiously avoiding the hole in the carpet, and the angry person goes, "Look at that hole in the carpet," and so we count on them in some way. But, again, if you're the person and you're perpetually discontented and all you see in this room pretty well is the hole in the carpet, and you can't see the beautiful sconces, and you can't see the effort somebody put into the catering, and you can't see, it's a pretty dissatisfied life. And so I come back to, not calling that state bad or wrong. And I think we always have to honor whatever we're feeling and recognize it for what it is. But you don't necessarily want to be defined by your angriest time, and kind of carry that around all the time. It in the Buddhist psychology, anger is described as being like a forest fire, which burns up its own support. So in other words, it can damage us. It can destroy us. And so what we want is that energy. We don't want to lose that ever. And even that clarity, that truth-telling ability, but not maybe the perpetual discontent.
So you said a few minutes ago that there's a good side to all of these. Mm-hmm. Would that good side, how you mentioned, we don't want to lose the clarity and the truth-telling, is that considered the good side?
Yeah, that is the good side. It's like a penetrating intelligence or wisdom.
So what are the good sides to the other two, delusion and then the craving and grasping?
Well, with delusion, which I'm very familiar with, the good side is a kind of evenness or balance or equanimity. But when you're really deluded, that equanimity comes from not noticing. When you learn to pay attention much more carefully and take in much more and sort of know what you're feeling and know what you yourself want, you can still have that kind of balance, but with awareness instead of a lack of awareness. Like I was always told by my friends that I, as a deluded type, was a delight to travel with because I'd never noticed anything, I traveled with a friend through China, and she said to me, we go to the hotel or whatever, and she said, "Do you mind if I take that bed over there?" And I say, "No, that's fine." And 20 minutes later, I said, "Why did you want that bed?" And then she'd say, "Oh, the mosquito net looks better, and it's close to the window, so I can control the window, and it's close to the light, so I can control the light." And I noticed nothing, but I was fine with it all. And with a craving or grasping, it there's something in there that is like a love of life. It helps us get close to experience. We're not aloof. We're not standing back. We're not cynical. We want experience. We want to be close to people, to things, to life itself. But it comes with a kind of stickiness when it's really craving, is never enough. And we're always comparing, like, do they have more? And we're always missing often when we're lost in that state. Like, what am I compromising to get this thing, to have this experience? What am I giving up? Where's the balance? Or how am I actually going to be happier? And so we don't want that stickiness and that kind of habitual element, but that love of life is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I have had to move through a lot of different addictions in my life, and in different ways than other people. Like I never did a 12-step program or anything like that, but I have struggled with bulimia, with drugs, with alcohol, with prescriptions, really all the things. I used to joke that I could get addicted to gummy bears if I had enough of them. But it's true. And I think that a part of it is just, or for a really long time, was my, not really inability, but my unwillingness to sit in discomfort. And so if I was just distracting myself with some other feeling, taste, something I was seeing, so, when Netflix came out, the fact that I could binge a whole series at once was like a whole new drug I had to figure out. And so I found your practice of urge surfing to be really helpful. Can you teach us about that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's not just, although urge stuffing is about being with discomfort. There's also a great inability we tend to have just culturally of being with ordinary things. They were kind of boring. We tend to need intensity in order to feel alive, even intense pain, let alone intense pleasure. And so the ordinary, the routine, the repetitive, it's not making it for us until we train our attention to actually take in subtlety and be more present even in those times. But it is very hard to be with the discomfort because most of us are conditioned to add something to it so that it's not, you could just say just the pure experience of what's uncomfortable is what's uncomfortable plus sense of isolation. It's only me. I'm the only one who Friday night is feeling this, and a sense of blame. I should never have, let this happen, or, I've been meditating for all these years. Why is this still here? Is this all my fault? Or a sense of permanence. This is what I'm going to feel forever. There's nothing else, even though I just felt 50 other things that didn't count, And so the first thing we want to do is kind of look at the add-ons, as we call them, and loosen their grip a little bit. It's not bad that they came and, in thoughts or feelings or sensations, whatever form it takes. But to understand that if we dive into them and we take them to heart, it's going to be much harder. So it's relinquishing the hold on them. And then it is like surfing the urge. It's like, okay, here it is. It's like this storm, this weather moving through me. I want this, whatever it is, or them, whatever they are. And let it come through, and there's a certain confidence and even self-respect in that. Like, yeah, I mean, I couldn't handle this when I was 15, but I can actually handle this now. Like I can breathe. I can create enough space around it so it doesn't consume me. I can remember I'm not alone, because that is a fundamental truth. We are never as alone as we sometimes feel. We can remember things we've learned and just bring them up so that we're not feeling so forlorn in the face of this desire, whatever it is. It's also interesting, and this is something we rarely do, because when there's a strong craving or desire, we tend to fixate on and be fascinated by the object, the story, the thing, the person, whatever it is. We rarely kind of pivot our attention around as though to ask ourselves, what does it feel like to want something so badly? And we start with the body. Like, what does it feel like in my body to have this kind of yearning, this wanting? And then it's like we break it down to its component parts. It's like, what's the movie that's going on? And people discover very interesting things. Like people say things like, I didn't realize how much loneliness there was in the desire. I think it was really about that. I thought it was really about that thing or that person or that experience, but look at what was in the heart of it. Or I didn't realize there was so much sadness in that anger. And we learned so much from being able to look at the feeling itself.
I find it so fascinating how sometimes I just need to hear that there's a different way to look at something and my entire energy around it shifts. And I'm reminded of when I was living in LA, one thing I love about LA is just kind of the conscious community. And I used to be a part of a women's group, and we'd go and just have a different topic and we'd talk about it for an hour or two on different nights. And that circle was the first time I had ever heard the phrase, like, to create space for something. Yeah. And I remember thinking, like, what are you talking about? But then I sat down with it and I was just like, what does this mean to me? And it all just unraveled just with this new phrase of looking at something. And I'm like, create space for it. Suddenly the idea of like these uncomfortable feelings that I was always trying to steer myself away from, just the idea that I could create space for them allowed me to sit there comfortably and actually feel that I had created space, feel that this sensation wasn't unbearable, feel that it was something that I could handle, feel that it was just a feeling and not like this actual need to get up and run. And so the idea of contraction versus expansiveness and like that ability to create space for it it doesn't need, for me, it didn't need to be this lifelong practice.
Uh-huh.
It was able to transform just by a new thought.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's not, I mean, we say journey because it's a journey, but it's a journey we can take in a moment, for that moment. Like, oh, I'm permanently free, It's not something like that, but we can traverse that whole distance from isolation and constriction to openness with a thought, as you say.
True. And the journey for me was making that spaciousness more or last longer than the moment. Because there's this moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, there's this freedom. But then all of my habits and my tendencies and my neural pathways are still going towards that contraction. And it's the practice of like, okay, no, remember, create space,
right,
remember, sit in this. And that's where the more long-term change comes from.
Yeah. I mean, I really always urge people, please don't feel discouraged that you have to do this again and again. Like early in my practice, I just assumed it was going to be the great breakthrough experience, and after that it's like smooth sailing forever, and it's not exactly like that, but we're growing and changing all the time. And we fall down and we can pick ourselves up or let others help us up and we go forward. And we're always kind of beginning again.
So we have these 3 root hindrances that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But what is it that causes us to lean on these 3 things versus something that is naturally better for ourselves, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's many things that, could be summed up probably in the word conditioning, because there's cultural conditioning, there's family conditioning, there's, cultural conditioning in the sense of, we probably hear the message over and over and over again that something like endless accumulation is going to keep us safe. It's going to make us happy. It's going to keep change from happening.
So we have these, we're basically conditioned in different ways, whether it's society, whether it's our family. But because they're all different, is there power in figuring out like where each of these things came from for us individually? Or is it something where we can just be like, well, I know one of these is holding me back. I can just kind of move from here. Like, is it valuable to delve into our past and kind of unwrap the trauma or whatever it is that created each of the tendencies? Or is it better to just sort of realize we have the tendencies and move on from there, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a better or worse paradigm so much as I think what's essential is to be able to disentangle in the moment. And if going into the past and having that kind of understanding you find helps you disentangle in the moment, I could see how it could. Then you begin to think of things as less personal, for example, and understand them as forces of conditioning. You don't feel so upset and ashamed and freaked out when you see it. You think, oh yeah, that's that old tape, This is kind of a funny example, but what just popped into my mind is my friend, my colleague, Joseph Goldstein, who as a young boy loved to sing and probably didn't have the most melodious voice in the world. And I forget how old he was. He was very young in some school chorus or something. And the teacher said to him, you just mouth the words, so he was just like incapable of singing. And he loved to sing, and this went on for decades. And, if he thought about singing, he'd feel embarrassed. He'd feel upset, he felt like hiding or whatever. And then somebody, we were out in Boulder teaching, and somebody gave him the gift of singing lessons, not for improving his voice, but to have a good time. And that's when he sort of picked up singing again. Now he's always belting out some tune or another. And you just see, we take things so to heart and we believe them so utterly. And we just need a little bit of space here too, a little bit of space to step back and look at some of those thoughts and beliefs and convictions. Say, is it really true? Am I really ruining someone's day by singing? We don't always do that. We just kind of go along, and we're busy and we've got a lot of responsibility and we've got a lot to do. And we don't necessarily step back and do that kind of introspection, but we can. And there's so many ways. My way, of course, was meditation. That's how I have practiced all these years, but it doesn't have to be meditation. It's just some activity or lack of activity, being still or journaling or being in therapy or something that will allow you to just take that kind of look like, is it really true that it's a dog eat dog world? And if I help someone else, it'll weaken me. Is it really true that gratitude makes you stupid and compassion makes you stupid and vengefulness makes you strong? Is that really true? And we don't try to figure it out, but we look at our experience directly. Like, what am I feeling when I'm, thinking about someone else's actions for the 15th hour in a row and I'm all upset about it? Is that really strong? Or what am I feeling when I feel compassion? Is that really weak? Is it? And so we have that opportunity to discover for ourselves.
It's funny how many answers I'll get just from, again, giving myself the space to ask the questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we assume that we know the inner workings of our mind and our motivations and our assumptions because we're with ourselves all the time and we're the ones that are in our minds. So of course we know. But so often I don't even realize that my behaviors are driven by just this repetitive pattern that I've been clinging to my entire life because I'm triggered by something and then I'm triggered and then I'm in fight or flight and then I'm reacting in this habitual way without bringing more awareness or thought to it. And so it's taken a really long time to get to the point of being like, wait, I'm in a cycle again and it's not comfortable. Can I unravel this a little bit? Can I step back a little bit? Can I ask a question? What's the first question that comes to mind? What's the first thing I feel like needs to be challenged? And just go on a walk even without headphones and allow myself to think a little bit more and think a little bit more consciously instead of just letting my brain run wild.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've talked about allowing more space around these sort of difficult feelings. But there was one process that you talked about that I found really helpful called the handshake process. Can you teach us about that?
That was a very direct kind of instruction about those things that came from my Tibetan teacher, Sonny Rinpoche. He describes those states we experience inside, like jealousy, fear, grasping, rage, all these things as our beautiful monsters. To note the word beautiful. And so the question is, how am I going to relate to this habit? We can want to deny it, push it away. We get ashamed. We're upset. We're freaked out about the appearance of this state. And that's not helpful. Or we can get consumed by it and overcome by it and start acting out from that place. And that is usually not that helpful either. So we talk about mindfulness as a place in the middle where you can be completely connected, say, to what you're feeling without either being lost in it and driven by it or hating it and pushing it away. It's that place in the middle that we're cultivating. We actually train, to be more and more in that space. And so what he's describing that space as is handshake. It's like you're sitting at home minding your own business and the doorbell rings and you get up to answer the door and there's one of these visitors. You have many options. You can fling open the door and say, welcome home. It's all yours. It's like forgetting they're only visiting, that you live there, your awareness, your balance, your compassion actually live there. Or you can freak out and try desperately to shut the door, only to find that visitor comes in the window or down the chimney or something. That's just not effective. It's not going to work. And so what do we do when we open the door? Can you be present? Can you kind of ground? Can you be centered? Can you recognize what you're experiencing as a visitor? And in a way, be hospitable. Don't let them take over the house, but invite them in. And you're strong enough to do that. You can be a little kind and in the presence of that state, even as you don't let them take over. And so that's the whole delicate training that one goes through in cultivating mindfulness, so that you can more and more be in that place. And I like the way he expresses it as handshake. In other Tibetan teachings, they sometimes say, invite that force in for a meal. Keep an eye on them. Really, you don't have to be that upset about their presence. If anything, it's a state of some suffering if you get involved in it. And so you can have a little tenderness. So I used that example once in teaching a class, and someone in the room didn't like it. And I said, well, how about invite them in for a cup of tea? And they said, well, how about a cup of tea to go? And I said, okay, if that's the extent of your hospitality, that's fine. And I would say my favorite definition of mindfulness came years ago with this article in the New York Times about one of the very, very early pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the classroom. And it was a fourth grade classroom in Oakland. So the kids were like 9 or 10 years old. And so the journalist asked one of the kids, "What is mindfulness? What is mindfulness?" And what the kid said was, "Mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's mindfulness." And I thought that is a great definition of mindfulness, because what does it imply? It implies you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after you've sent that email, not after you've lashed out at your kids, but as it's building. And it implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger, because if you're consumed by all of these different feelings that come, you're likely to hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life can be really frustrating. But at the same time, if you freak out, "Oh no, I'm angry, it's terrible, I'm bad, I'm awful," and you get tighter and tighter and tighter, and then you'll explode. And so mindfulness means you're really connected to what's going on. You're very aware of it. There is some space. And in that space, creativity can arise, or options can appear. I like to think of that 9 or 10-year-old kid thinking, "Hit someone in the mouth last week. Didn't work out that well. Maybe I'll try my words," or something like that. And so it's not that you never do anything about anything, but there's a much greater range of possibility.
Yeah, the words that come to my mind are allowance and acceptance. And it reminds me of the process of learning to meditate, where in the beginning, and I think it's such a misconception with so many people that don't meditate, is that they're trying to figure out how to sit there and not have any thoughts, which is just nearly impossible.
Right.
And I feel like the same misconception happens with a practice of mindfulness, where they're expecting to get to this place of not feeling anger, not feeling judgment. And then when it pops up and all of a sudden they have a judgmental thought about somebody, they're like, "Darn it, I'm never going to be good at this. I'm not a very good person," whatever it is. And it's just like, no, it's how you engage with those thoughts or those emotions that come up. And can you sit with them? Can you allow it? Can you invite them in, as you say? I have been reading this for some reason when I'm sick, which, if listeners can't tell, I'm just getting over something, but I've been sick for the last week, and I have a really hard time reading or watching anything that's intelligent beyond a certain level. So I always read a romantic comedy or something. I was reading this romantic comedy by one of my favorite romantic comedy authors that I read when I'm sick. And the whole process, or the whole storyline between these two people that were falling in love were being harmless to one another, because they were both going through some traumatic things. And I just loved that. It was like something I'm like, oh, I'm actually going to take a lesson away from this book that I thought I was just reading for fun. But I like the idea of agreeing to be harmless to yourself in a different way. And so if those thoughts of judgment do come up and you shake its hand, or the thoughts of grief or isolation, whatever the hard feeling that you're dealing with, can you shake its hand and just agree to be harmless to one another? Trust that this feeling or this emotion is not going to be harmless to you if you sit with it, just as you aren't going to be harmless back by judging yourself for feeling it or thinking it.
That's beautiful.
So we've talked about learning to sit with emotions better and some different tools for dealing with it. But another thing that you talk about in your book is learning how to be better with difficult circumstances. And that can be so difficult, because it's not just, oh, I can calm this thing within myself. Maybe you're actually living in an experience of chaos or hardship. So what's your process for learning to be better at kind of being in the difficult circumstances, rather than running from it or doing one of the hindrances that we've talked about before?
I think there are many steps to that process, because things can be really hard, and it would be too glib to try to deny that. But there are also elements that give us a sense of resource. It's like, if I think of the stress dynamic, which is a dynamic, there's the pressure or the circumstance or the commentary, whatever is causing the stress, that's coming at us. And then there's the resource with which it's met. And we know that just from ordinary life, right? Like if you haven't slept at all last night and then you overhear a comment today at work, it lands really deeply and you're very annoyed and you're freaked out. And whereas if you were perfectly rested, and you heard that very same comment, you would go, huh, that's curious. Maybe I need to find out more, but you wouldn't be so taken apart by it. So we want a sense of resource. We want a sense of wherewithal within. And especially when we feel under pressure or things are hard or we're taking care of somebody else. Caregiving is a kind of classical example of a time when, people just burn out. Not because they lack caring. They're very, very caring, but because there's a kind of balance that's not there at the moment. Maybe it's the balance between compassion for themselves as well as compassion for others, or maybe it's the balance between really trying to make a difference and remembering it's not in my hands ultimately. Like I also once said in front of a group of people, I thought if I were only in control of this universe, it would be so much better a world. And someone in the room challenged me and they said, are you sure? And I thought about it for a moment and I said, I am really sure. But you know what? It's not to be. And so I think we always want to bring wisdom into any circumstance, like what is in my control and what is not in my control. Or remember that things might take time and I need to do what I can do right now or today or in this meeting or, right now. And it's all like building blocks. We tend to be trained also culturally, I think, to be very impatient, and that doesn't help because sometimes things really take time. I say to myself in a bad time, I say, okay, what can I do right now? Just even if it seems small, nothing is too small. What is the thing I can remember? And the other part of it, which is also not that easy, is remembering to take in the joy, because sometimes we feel so bereft and so overcome. It's like I actually would ask myself as is a practice, like, what do I have to be grateful for today? 3 small things. I'm still breathing. That is a good thing. Doesn't have to be grandiose or, those are the kinds of things we feel too overcome to pay attention to, or it seems too stupid. People often say, well, I don't know about like that gratitude practice because, that's like training yourself to accept crumbs, as you're being oppressed or something like that. But really, it's like strength training. If we have some sense of resource, we don't feel completely deficient and defective, then we can meet situations better. We can enter that stress dynamic with a greater sense of wherewithal and resource. And that's very important. So it's both like realizing what I can't control and also looking for the joy and allowing myself to take it in.
Yeah. When you said the example of it's like allowing yourself to accept crumbs and be grateful for it, the first thing that came to my mind is just realizing that, well, whatever state that I'm in, even if things are hard, if I allow myself to stay there for long enough, I sometimes don't even realize when I've moved out of it because I'm so used to being stressed out or unhappy or yearning for more or grasping for something else that when I get more, I'm still reaching outside of that. I'm still grasping for more. And not to say that there's not something beautiful in trying to progress or trying to evolve or trying to make your life as beautiful as possible. But if you never train yourself to find that gratitude in what you do have, then nothing's ever going to feel like enough. I loved the word choice you used. You used a phrase in your book called widening the window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And I loved looking at it this way because so often we are in these contractive or constrictive states. And if we don't kind of push ourselves beyond that or learn to sit in the discomfort or use all of these tools that we've been talking about to move ourselves to a different state, it's like we've never really get to see ourselves or meet ourselves just beyond that. Yeah. And I've found that kind of following my curiosity sometimes of, well, this is how I've been living for this long, or this is what I'm used to. Who am I just beyond this state? Who am I just beyond this tendency? And even just asking myself that allows me to sort of widen that window a little bit more. But go deeper on this idea of widening the window of tolerance, because I just really loved that perspective.
Well, that's a formulation that Dan Siegel made from the Western psychological point of view some time ago. And it's also, I found it really beautiful as well. And I would call it, in terms of the meditation practice, sometimes I call it stretching. You know, what you just described, it's sort of like, it's realizing that I can be in a rut. I have a very accustomed way of seeing myself, seeing others. So I'm going to see what it's like when I just stretch, and not move from a true place to a phony place, but move from a true place to maybe another true place that gets very little airtime. Like, what's it like? There are any number of people in most people's lives, people who play some kind of function that we hardly notice. We tend to dehumanize or discount, checkout person in the supermarket, or somebody who, performs a service for us, maybe even quite regularly, that we don't tend to even really see fully. And if you realize that, then it's kind of like a moment of saying, I'm going to pay complete attention to this person. And what do we discover? We may discover many things. I was staying in New York once for a while, and in a certain neighborhood, and a writer friend of mine was living in the same neighborhood, and he showed me an advanced copy of his manuscript one day, and he was talking about this very thing. He was writing about this very thing. He was writing about going into the corner grocery store very often, and pretty well seeing the same person working behind the counter, and not really having much of a sense of her, being sort of indifferent to her, and except a very, very vague sense that maybe she was a little glum or a little unhappy or something like that, but very vague. And he was so shocked at his own inattention and indifference. He wrote, I realized I might as well have been a cash register with arms. She might as well have been a cash register with arms, for all I really saw her. So he determined he was going to go into the store and pay absolute complete attention to her. And he did that. And the first thing he noticed in the store was that she was singing along to something on the radio. She had an exquisitely beautiful voice. So he said to her, wow, you have a really beautiful voice. And she lit up. She gave him this big, beautiful, radiant smile. So I was reading this story and I thought, wow, I know exactly who he's talking about. I'm in the same neighborhood. I go into the same store quite a lot. I know the woman. I too don't really pay any attention to her pretty much, except this very vague sense that maybe she's a little unhappy or something. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go into the store and I'm going to say to her, I've heard you have a really beautiful voice. I thought to say I've read you have a really beautiful voice is too weird, but I can say I've heard you have a really beautiful voice. I'm going to watch her, normally a little bit scowly kind of face, light up, and she's going to give me this big smile. So I went into the store, determined to do that. And the first thing I noticed was that she was already smiling radiantly. And I thought, okay. And I realized I hadn't taken her in at all. So how many people do we miss? How much of life do we miss because we're just not paying attention? Or, when I use that example of gratitude, it's like I'm so conditioned at the end of the day not to think of what I can be grateful for, but what went wrong? What can I complain about? And that's just where my mind goes. And it takes not force or coercion, but intention to say, what else happened today? Anything good? And all of these are like stretches, and they make our world so much bigger.
I love that. And I'm just having these like different sort of visuals of processes of healing for myself, and seeing so much of the emotional turmoil or the inner turmoil that I've experienced, just looking at that through the lens of constriction and expansiveness it's just, we get that tunnel vision. It's our automatic response, but then we're just inside of ourselves. We feel isolated versus this feeling of expansiveness, whether you're giving space to your own emotions, but also you had defined love in this way that I really loved, but you described it as love as an embodied knowing of connection with ourselves, with another, with life. And that's so true. It's just actually seeing ourselves and as not just this solo being alone in the world, but of actually seeing our interconnectedness. And so for listeners out there, I absolutely love and recommend your book, Real Life. There's so many different authors that you mention in there that have been on this show, like Dr. Judd Brewer, Dr. Scott, Barry Kaufman, Dan Siegel, all of who have been on Mind Love. And so for listeners, it's a really great read to kind of bring a lot of the topics that we've talked about together. So is there anything else that you would like to share? Otherwise, where's the best place for listeners to find you?
Probably my website, which is just SharonSalzberg.com. I think spell check is going to want to send you to the city in Austria instead of my name, which is spelled Salzberg, not URG. But that's probably the best place to see my schedule and such things.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/309. Your challenge for this week is twofold. First, I want you to just bring more awareness to your feelings. The way I've been practicing this is that whenever I feel anything, when I can remind myself to stop and just feel it, I do. Usually what we do is we react or we respond or we blame or all of the things that we've been doing our entire lives that, if we're honest with ourselves, aren't exactly serving us, right? Well, just adding this brief pause between what you're experiencing and your reaction can allow you the opportunity to go deeper into it. And once we're in there, we have options. We can either begin to challenge the narrative that we're telling ourselves. Is this really true? Can I absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, know this to be true? How do I react, or what happens when I believe that thought? Who would I be without that thought? You might recognize those questions from Byron Katie's The Work, which are still probably my four favorite questions to dive deeper into my own thinking. But besides just challenging our thoughts that we believe are creating our emotions, we can also just sit with the emotion. We can also just get curious about what that emotion feels like. What's my body doing? What do I feel inside? Do I feel energy anywhere? Do I feel blockages anywhere? Sitting with these feelings allows us to be with them as they move through us and pass, rather than getting stuck within our bodies. And if you want more research on the science of emotions getting stuck in our bodies, you might want to check out episode 285 with Dr. Bradley Nelson and his research in the book, The Emotion Code. So remind yourself of your challenge this week in whatever way you can. Set an alarm on your phone for every few hours. Have a Post-it note on your mirror. This is such a valuable practice to really instill into your daily life. The goal in life is to develop a positive relationship with our bodies and our emotions. Our body is supposed to be a learning device in this incarnation. So, what is it telling you? If you loved this episode, please consider sharing it. Take a screenshot, tag Mind Love Melissa and Mind Love Podcast, and Sharon Salzberg on Instagram. If you want more than just the podcast to start building your intentional life, consider joining the Mind Love membership at mindlove.com/membership. Every month, there's a new masterclass that allows you, or guides you, I should say, into creating another area of intention in your life, whether it's your morning routine, your evening routine, goal setting, EFT tapping. Each masterclass is actually worth more than the entire year membership overall. So you get a huge wealth of value within this membership. So that's at mindlove.com/membership. You can also find all of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.